Hi Blender folk. In my Blender to Substance and Back tutorial I said at some point I was going to get round to doing the second part of my MeshCleanup tutorial, and so welcome to the second part of my MeshCleanup tutorial. This is long overdue, so apologies for those of you who have actually bothered to check out the first part. Now, as the title suggests, it's about mesh cleanup, not necessarily excuse me, pulling in a specific model. The model I'm using in this instance is the Thunderbirds Mole, part 1. I use Thunderbird 2. Now this has come from a SketchUp model. I exported it as collider, and this is how the collider came in, and as I say, I'm using this to show you cleanup techniques, things to look for, things to watch out for, and methods to attack things. If you just actually wanted to pull in a model from SketchUp, then look for the Import SketchUp Scene add-on. Don't think that's part and parcel of, actually I don't think it's part and parcel of the standard setup. I think that's an actual add-on you'd have to go hunting for. Let's do a quick Google search, see if it does actually pull up anything. There you are. You'll find it on GitHub, so there you go, and you see 2017. So go looky there for the add-on, and once you've added it, you can import a SketchUp file. Now, it no play really nicely with existing ones. It doesn't necessarily do a stupendous job. As you can see, that was stunningly ineffective. However, if in SketchUp you save the file as a SketchUp 7 or a SketchUp version 8 file, that imports pretty nicely, including the SketchUp camera. If I switch that to just visible layers, so because I have my own camera and light on layer 1, so you see you've got everything from SketchUp. And really then the only thing you've got to do is, if I select all the meshes by using type, and I can smooth them and turn on auto smoothing, then you get a pretty good result straight off the bat. So if you're just interested in pulling files in from SketchUp, this is a method that's probably more suitable if you have that. However, if you only have files like 3ds or collider or what have you, then you can end up with something like this. Now, I've separated bits of this onto their own layers just for isolation, so I can show some things which are going on. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into wireframe, and I'm just going to move them to another layer as well, back to solid, and I'm just going to show you various things. I mean, this is one of these wheels here, so if I hide that and hide that, it's one of all of these. So you know, where you've got strange geometry going on, you're always looking for things where you can sort of do one and make multiples. So by changing this one thing, I can make multiples of that. Likewise with the wheel, I can use that for the rest of the wheels, and so on and so forth. So that's one of the things about cleanup. Look to where you only do it once and you then don't have to duplicate it. Shall I tell you what, let's get this up and running. That's super duper. Okay, now this one on the face of it should be pretty simple, but it's bizarrely been made up of multiple pieces, and not all of them are what you think. If we take this guy and go into edit mode, and I'll just go into local view. It's a great way of isolating your object. You can see what we've got here, and more so if I go into wireframe. I've got points with no actual geometry related to it. This is one of the things you find when you import things like this. This is something I find very common in Collada files. It puts an end cap there, whereas in fact what that should have actually been is just a bridge of loops between that, and so you end up with loose geometry and everything. So if I go into vertex mode and I select by trait and select loose geometry, you can see just how many of those points aren't doing anything. So just delete them. Now you could merge points, but if I undid that and I just selected everything and merged doubles, remove doubles, that still doesn't address these that haven't actually got any geometry. So you'd still have to come along and remove loose geometry anyway, so you might as well do it off the bat. Now this whole thing can be tackled in multiple ways. I'll do the simple one first. So we'll come into object mode. I'm going to invert my selection, shift click to do that and join them. Then I'm going to go into edit mode, and I can select that face and delete it. And then on the face of it, pardon the pun, all you need to do is select these two, and that tells you I haven't merged the points here, so let's WR to merge those two. So it's cleared the 4 points where it's connected up. Now do the points. I mean, actually that's a good thing to highlight. By you do that, the fact that the edge loop doesn't go all the way around tells you that although it looks complete, there's an issue. So look for things like that. So you select these two, and you would assume you're going to get a nice bridge of quads there, but you would assume wrong, and it makes a right mess. And there can be numerous reasons for that. It can be that what you've got here is some polygons that haven't been extruded. Or it could be that you've just got a duplicate edge. So again, if you'll select an edge there, and select an edge there, and you expect it to work and it still doesn't. But the main reason actually is very simple. These are pointing the wrong way. See how this face is pointing out the same as this? Whereas in reality what you want for is you want that pointing in, because that's going to be an indent off the face. So now when we bridge edge loops, we get what we expect. And so you just do the same there, flip the normals. So that would be one way of tackling that. Just select those inner two bits, flip the normals, and then assign your bridge loops. Right, now if I just go all the way back out, there we go. Another way of doing it is just again select everything, WR, and what you're going to do this time is actually select these and separate them again. Simply create a face there. So I highlight in the loop and press F. Select those two. Go into wireframe so you can see what you're doing. Inset. Get it roughly right. go into side view, extrude, and then scale on the Z with the median point set. And there's that one done. So that's a couple of ways of dealing with it. If you actually want more geometry on this, what you can do is you can select an edge ring like that, then select the edge loop and then simply subdivide, and that gives you twice as many segments. Then if you've got your loop tools active, your loop tools add-on, you can just do circle, alt click, and then shift R to repeat the last action. Alt click, shift R, alt click, shift R, alt click, shift R, alt click, shift R, and that's duplicated the number of segments. Now you've got to decide whether it's quicker to do that or simply quicker to set the cursor to selected, come out, add a circle, give it the number of sides you want, let's call it 48 so it's halfway between, scale that in, and go in to edit mode, face, extrude, drag it down, then insert and extrude. So that would be another way of doing it. So you've got multiple ways of tackling that one, but that one's pretty straightforward. And in this instance then you can just hide that and delete that. So that would be that one piece dealt with. And the next piece we're going to go on to is these bits here. And again, there's multiple ways of dealing with these. So with this, it actually should be something like a girder. So all of these bits here should be the holes, and then these bits in the middle should be filled in. So I'm going to show again a couple of ways of tackling this. I'm just going to hide these to start with, and then I'm going to go into wireframe and make it easier to see what I'm doing. I'm going to select these. These are all separate pieces at the moment, and then I just Control J to make that one piece, like that. And then I'm going to select that one, go back into solid view, and let's go into edit mode. So there's a myriad of ways you can tackle this. As I say, these are supposed to be blocked off. So the first thing that's obvious when you're looking at this is, if these are blocked off, if I'm starting to add faces here, let's get rid of that manipulator, it gets on my nerves. My bad, I should have actually joined them two together for this particular methodology. So if I'm joining these two faces here, well, there's a couple of issues. One, these holes, for want of a better word, are in the wrong orientation. So these here would need to be flipped. I'm going to do flip normals, and that now makes more sense with them being a hole. But even now, if I do that and make a face, it looks okay. But what you're doing is you've got unnecessary geometry behind it. So you want to get rid of something like that, you know, it's just common sense. So we can delete those faces, but just delete the faces. And likewise, that should be connected here and between here and down here. So we want that face gone. And if that again is facing inwards, so that needs to be flipped to face outwards. And then it visually makes sense I mean, this is not an elegant way to show it, but if I do that, you can see that now at least that the faces are the right way around. They're as they should be. So you want to get rid of that because I want to show a better way of making sure that all those edges are joined. And the way you do that is make sure you join these first. So you find something like that and you're thinking, what makes the most sense in terms of drawing the geometry? So you know if these are joined in and this is going to be joined in, you want an edge all the way along there because you want to select all of these edges in order to create the polygon, because if you just select that and that, it's not going to do it. And if those faces aren't done, then you're not going to have an edge there to use. So you just think about it, and the easiest way is shift click that, just click it and control click that, shift click that and hit face. And that's done that one because you've got these two here. And do the same there, click that, control click that, shift click that, face. And then you just repeat that procedure on the back. And I mean, I'll show you what I mean here. If I can click that, I can click that, and click that. And if I do a face, right, click, 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 face, it ain't pretty. You know, and then you say, well, I'll just join those two up. And it looks like that is joined, but the trouble is, and I add that now, and then I isolate these two, go into point mode, and get rid again of any loose geometry. It doesn't all necessarily line up tidy, you know. So you've got to be wary of that. So I just find it generally easier to pick on bits that make sense to me. So like I basically give myself a nice straight canvas there to work from by having all of these edges clearly marked, and that way I say can either control click or just manually go along and click on each one. Control click's great because it'll show you if there's any gaps. Shift click F, click, control click, shift click F, and so there's that one done. Now this one does mean you end up with some very big NGons. You know, I mean, if we take those two and hide it and go into point mode, oh, not subdivision mode, but point mode, you can see that that's got 10 vertices, that's got 12 vertices. So when it comes to things like doing bevels and that, you might not get the result you expect. You know, it might distort it. And if we in fact go in, deselect it, sorry, let's just add, oh, don't want wire, let's add a bevel to sort of check that out. Let's just wind that in. And you can see here actually, if I get the light right, you can see how you're getting sort of deformation there. Even if I choose to angle, it's because it's an NGon, you're getting some very strange behaviour. I call that 4mm. So that would look ugly simply because of those big NGons. So, oh, and speaking of geometry that shouldn't exist, we've got a single object here that is basically almost a polygon, which is an edge. If I go into edit mode on it, in fact it is exactly that, it's an edge. It doesn't even have a polygon. So you would delete that. Right, now let's look at another way of dealing with this. And this actually does require it separated, so let's hide that. In fact, I'm going to Control Z to unhide that, and I'm going to give it underscore at the front so it goes to the top, so I know what I'm looking for. Now I can hide it. Select these. I'm selecting the middle one just so that that's the logical point, and again I'm going to underscore that. So I'm working with them. Now what I'm going to do with this is I'm actually going to select these faces and I'm going to extrude them up. Select those faces and separate by selection. Then I'm going to undo the actions I've just done. Now I'm going to do the same here. Select these, extrude them out, and I'm doing this with the faces because it makes sure that they obey the normals, which is critical for what I'm about to do, which is I'm actually going to be, and again undo. So if I go into local mode, you can see I've basically not changed anything. Go back out of edit mode, and I'm going to unhide that. Now they're all at the top. You see, I know I can just work in the outliner really tidily. I'm going to select these two, join them, go into edit mode, select everything, scale X0 so they line up, and then just GX to move them off the way. It doesn't matter which way you move it, but there. Now I'm going to go into local view and go into here, and we're going to do the first part of what we did initially, which is select them, and we're going to delete the faces, and we're just going to flip the normal on that face. And then I'm going to come out of local view, select that, and go back into edit mode. Choose an appropriate view, select everything, and then in the tools I'm going to choose knife project and make sure I choose cut through. Now I'll go back into local view so I can see. And what that's done is it's given me basically quads everywhere, and I'll just deselect everything, do the same, select, should have done that first, select loose geometry and delete the vertices. And just to make sure everything's nicely quadded, for want of a better phrase, I'm just going to select these edge points here and press J to join them, so all along here we've got quads. So happy days on that. So we can come out, that can go now, that its job is done. And we can select that, and just going to select everything while it's in there and flip the normals, come back out, then join them. And I did it while it was still a separate object because it saves selecting them individually. It was just a little bit quicker. Right, now we do the same as before, and again what I'm going to do is do these middle bits first, and the reason I'm doing that, I use the F2 add-on, so I'll do F. If I do there an F, it tries to go up here, and that's no good. So if I select these first and I bridge these, and I'll do the same on the other side, select these and bridge them. Again, it's thinking about workflow of how much time can you save. So I'm just click, shift click and F. Now if I select these two, get the right edges, Colin, press F. Now I start pressing F, and because everything has got an edge already, one clearly didn't. My mistake. I know what I've done. What I don't need actually is I don't need that edge there, and that edge there, so I can Control X them, because those two are going to line up. Now it'll work. I should have spotted that. There you go. Do the same on the other side, and it doesn't matter where I start, frankly. And there you go. So that does that. But that gives you a much cleaner geometry. And now if we add a bevel to this, we'll make it about 4mm. Crease it, put it on an angle. Take the wireframe off. You can see you're not getting, and if I unhide that, you can compare the distortion on the two, like that. You see you're getting distortion there. Let's see if we can put matte cap on. Let's choose a nice, oh that's a bit lurid, isn't it? Try the usual. So you can see that clear distortion there, whereas this doesn't suffer from it because it's all quads. So that's one method of dealing with it. There is yet another method that you can tackle this sort of thing for, and I'll go into wireframe, and I'm just going to isolate those and hide them back in solid view. And that is, I can again put that to the top, and I'm using the period key here on the numpad to jump in the outliner to what I've got selected in the view, so I know what I'm working with. And I can select, I'm just going to hide that, select these, Control J, again do the same, and just make sure they're both at the top. And I can just select these edge loops, hit F for face, so it adds a face on all of them. Do the same at this side, F for face, unhide the one I want. Now I'm just going to scale this on the Z axis so it's bigger than this one, so no clues as to what I'm going to be doing. And that's right, I'm actually going to be doing a Boolean. So let's select these and delete the faces. Now you know what's interesting in this one, those two faces are actually pointing the right way at the moment. So select them two and do F. Now, in order for the Boolean to solve nicely, I'm going to use the knife tool and Z to cut all the way through it. I just pressed the Z there, it didn't show up on the keypad, but Z ensures cut through. I'm going to click, come to the click, return, go out, unhide that, and that shows you where the cut is. So I'm going to take that, shift that, and do a Control minus to do a Boolean. Then I'm just going to apply the Boolean. And then we could delete that. And as you can see from that, you've got a nice geometry, and each one has a solving point, so that's handy. And you can just join them up if you want to. So that's a way to do it with a Boolean. And again, if let's add ourselves a bevel modifier, 4mm, and now you can see that, because it's not, that's still got the same problem here in terms of the NGons. So I mean, if you're going for tidy geometry, then realistically the all NGons one is the preferable one. So out of all of them, that would be the preferable method for tidiest, but it's also the longest. If you're not going to do bevels, it doesn't really matter. It depends how far away you are and how neat you want your geometry that you're working on in the end. But there are several ways of literally tackling the same thing. Now, again, when we were talking about things looking the same, as you can see here, if I unhide everything, that really this sort of geometry is duplicated in several places. Now in this instance I happen to have aligned the geometry with the cursor, but if you didn't have it automatically aligned to the cursor, then you'd want it at a center point, and a way to do that in this instance would be to sort of look at your outlying mesh that it's linked to. So in this instance we're looking at a mesh that has it duplicated this way, and if we include layer 2 you can see it's also duplicated the other way. So we only actually have to deal with a quarter of what we're dealing with, if you see what I mean. I mean that we could literally delete that if we wanted, but more of that later. And so we need to set up our point, so if we're going to use mirror, it behaves correctly. And in this instance what you would do is actually use this one. You can select the upper and lower point at what would become the middle, then extrude them on the X, and you would extrude them up to there where the center points are. Then you can just do cursor to selected. Then you can actually delete those vertices because you're done with them. And then here you can join these two because they're going to be the same beast. So you join them and then just set your object origin. Where's your origin? Here we go. Origin to 3D cursor. So now in this particular instance I can add a modifier of a mirror, and I can use both axes and do Control A to make sure that my rotation and scale are set, which again I should have, you can do that whether you've got the mirror activated or not, it'll just recorrect. And if we go into wireframe mode and the side view, you can see that they now line up. So that saved you a ton of work. So instead of me doing the same sort of thing as I've done, let's turn the mirror off so you can see, with those two, with them and with them, I've reduced the work to just two of them. I mean, you could maybe even try getting away with doing one and scaling it, but sometimes it's as broad as it's long to do both. So that means then that geometry and that geometry are redundant and I can delete them. So that's that one done. And I've saved this as work. And so I can reactivate that. So that's a lot done. And it's the same with this. If I come in here, let's just turn those off. Whoop. And I look at the background, I can choose to add a mirror. Now, so what I can do is let's try setting the pivot point, origin to 3D cursor. So let's add a mirror on the X, so that lines them two up. And then let's add an array, but not on the X, on the Y. And then just slowly drag it out to line up, add two more. and then you, again, holding shift down, just roughly position it. Just GY, that needs to come back to the, like that, that's right. So there we go. So that one item precludes getting rid of, I'm just going to hide these so I can see what I'm doing, all of these items. And so on and so forth. So you can see where I'm coming from. And again, turn that array and thing on. In fact, if you turn the mirror off, you can see just how effective it is. So again, when you're cleaning up a mesh, always look for shortcuts. No point in doing that and even copying it when you can set it up like that. And then if you do want physical ones at the end, simply apply your modifiers. So like if I delete that, say, and I apply that, and then with that I can just do that, origin to geometry. I can go in, and if I want to select it and separate them as parts, I can just go loose parts, come out, origin to geometry, and now each one of them has its own thing, but it's a unique part, but it was born of an array. So it's saved a lot of work in terms of actually cleaning up the mesh. So there's that. And so that's that part done. The next part we're going to look at is the wheel, which if we go into wireframe you can see is actually, there's more to it than what it appears in solid, and again that's because of these end caps that get generated. And so we're going to take a look at that. Right, with the wheel, again it's in a bit of a mess, and it's made up of several parts, as you can see here. Now a lot of these parts are the actual bolts, so again let's gonna hide the bits which aren't the bolts. And then I'm going to select all of the bolts, and I'm just going to move them to their own layer for now. So we're just dealing with the actual wheel section, nothing else, which is just these. And I'm going to give that 2 underscores so it's at the top, so I know it's that top bit. Okay, right. You got to decide if that's enough segments for you or not. And if so, then we can utilize the existing geometry. If not, then we'll just use the geometry as a guide and build a fresh one. And I'll do using the existing geometry first, and then create it from scratch second. So first thing we do, go into wireframe, let's have a look at the front, and something jumps out straight away. Some of these things aren't aligned. So if we have a look, that's off center, and that's okay. Now that the pivot is at the center, but the actual geometry is off center, so again that's something else to address. And if we look in solid view, what we can see is that this all is slightly off axis. We zoom in more, you can see that this is off axis. So if you were to animate this, it would be a bit of a wobbly wheel, and you wouldn't want that. So there's a couple of ways you can address that, and we'll address it first. If we go into wireframe and go in, we see that's not right. So let's take the external one, and we're just going to set the cursor to selected. Now I use custom pie menus here by, oh, and I do apologise if I get this wrong, PT Wazoo. They are all available if you look in Blender Artists for Wazoo's pie menus. He does a right mouse button one, which has some very useful stuff in it, and he does a left mouse button one, which is really useful because it has great snapping stuff and everything on it. I'll just drag that up. And he's also actually made a version of these for 2.8, so worth having. And I like it because of this particular thing, which is essential to me when you're working in edit mode. I mean, you can do it manually, but I'll show you why this is good in a minute. So anyway, so let us say cursor to selected. Now let's select that one. What we're going to do is going to activate that, which is manipulate center point only. And then I set my 3D cursor as the pivot point. Now what happens is if I scale on the y-axis, it doesn't scale the item, it moves it. And if I scale y0, it aligns it perfectly with the pivot point, and I'll scale z0 just to make sure it's fully aligned like that. So that lines everything beautifully without me having to do anything. Then I can just disable it. And this one, I can go into edit mode, deselect everything. I'm going to select that point, and like say here, I'll set the origin to selection. But notice, instead of doing it manually where you would set cursor to there, and then set origin to cursor when you came back out into object mode, this I presume does that, but then replaces the cursor where it took it from in the first place, which is really handy. And then again we can reactivate that, scale y0, and then everything lines up. And if we go into that now, you can have look, that lines up. I mean that bit of geometry here is just bad geometry within that object, which you also have to tackle. So there's that. Now I can just undo that if I go Z6 and 3 and I go through the undo a few times. So now if I select that, that should be back where it was, because you can do something similar in come on brain, work in edit mode. So select that, invert the selection, shift select, join everything up. Right, and then again in edit mode we can select all of them, actually hide everything else for now, solid mode. What we're going to do is we're going to have to delete that there, take that and do an Alt P so we've got a single point, unhide everything, so select everything there, wireframe, and it's a bit more awkward in this method, I would grant you. Deselect that center point and reselect it. Alright, set that to active, zoom in, and we need to line it up to a point, so there we can do GY and grab that center point there, and then when we look in there we can see that we've got that. So I can select that and press L, do the same as well, GY, bump. So that's then done the same as I did before, but in edit mode rather than in object mode. If it's separate like that in object mode, it's easier to do it that way. But if it's all a bunch of geometry anyway, then select the bit you want and use your active. And that way you can just set your last active point and it'll snap to there accordingly. So if I make that my active one and G, then it's that which will snap rather than snap it on the median. So if I set that to just closest and G, then as you can see it snaps based on a median thing. So don't underestimate the use of snap target of active. It's very handy. Same goes when you're doing your pivot point. Active element can be really useful. So right, well, we've got this, but we've still got a bit of a mess in terms of geometry. So we'll do the same as we did last time. We'll select that and on G, polygon sides, and just delete. Actually, before we deselect that one, though technically we don't need it because it's hidden. So you know what, let's just delete that as well and delete faces. And then we're just left with a few issues. This, we need to flip the normals on that, it's pointing the wrong way. So that looks more like now. This is ugly, so I'll just L to select that and Alt H to hide everything. That wasn't selected because it's 2 polygons, so we delete faces. And then that ugly seam there again is because of that. And again, that affects both your shading, and if you were trying to do a bevel, that would really mess things up. So let's get rid of that as well. And then what else have we got going on? So let's hide that, and you can see the bad geometry here is quite a mess. And also if I do a Control R, you can see that it's not done these two, so that says these 2 polygons aren't actually quads. So if I select them and I hide everything else, let's just go into wireframe. I find this is a lot easier to find, and we can see what we've got is we've got points here that don't belong. So I'm just going to select them to merge at last. Select them to merge at last. Unhide everything. Again, let's look for our questionable geometry. So select by trait, loose geometry. You see there's quite a bit there. Look at all those points that are just not needed, so we can delete them. Back into full view. And right now we've got to address this issue. So I can do a Control R there. Still not working because of these points. So I'm going to delete that edge. Control X. Now if I Control R, no, still got an issue. Why is that? So let's hide them. Again, go into wireframe, point mode. Control X that. Back into wire solid, and I've just realised I've not got my screencast on, my screen keys. Sorry about that. Okay, now let's try. Right, now I'm just going to pull that in too close to the other one. Like that. If I GG, I carry on. I just want it almost touching, but not quite. And then I'm going to hide those points. Then select everything that isn't those points and just delete the vertices. And that when I unhide, I've got what I want. So we go side view. I'm going to go EX. Hold Control as I've said before and grab there, and then I'm just going to Alt Shift click, and again bridge edge loops is your friend. And as you can see, that's messed things up. So that again tells me we've got an issue, and that's because I didn't clear that out. So I'm going to select that point, and I'm just going to delete the vertex. And then again, you can see where bridge edge loops does require everything to be pointing the right way. So now bridge edge loops, and it does what I expect it to. But as you can see, that's not lined up nicely. A really simple way of lining that up in this particular instance, because it's only going one way, and that again is to use active. I'm just going to select that as the active, GUI, bump, and I just control hovered over that, and because that was my active point, then it lined it up perfectly, as you can see. So that's another way you could move items if you didn't want to add the geometry of that face to start with. So that's all of that bit done. That's the most awkward bit. Now the rest is again obeying the rule of making sure your edges are the right way around. So this one and this one, again I need to flip the normals in order that it follows the path, so that when I select that and that and bridge edge loops, it does what I want. And as before, because that's the last action, Shift R will duplicate it. Now in this instance, this is the right way around. Shift Alt dump and Shift R. And again, this is also the right way around. So Alt click, Alt Shift click, Shift R. This is also the right way around. Alt click, Alt Shift click, Shift R. So there's your front bit done. The back bit, again similar. We need to invert these, so select everything with L, flip the normals, Alt click, Control Z if you misclick, Shift R, doesn't work because that wasn't the last thing we did. So press F3, I haven't got anything, so resort to that. So I had tried Shift R, that didn't work because that wasn't the last command I did. I did F3 because I've changed something. There was no history. Whereas now if I select this, Alt click that, and F3, I can bridge edge loops. And the same here. F3, bridge edge loops. Or like I say, you could have just used Shift R. And so that's the wheel done, utilising the existing geometry. And I have a habit of accidentally turning the wire on. And that's again, that's one of the Shift Z is one of the things, and just wire. I sometimes press Shift Z instead of Control Z, so I activate the wire accidentally.